Oh boy.
Hi everyone, so today we're working on this 2005 BMW X3. This car has a really bad coolant leak and it's coming from underneath the intake manifold. Normally the coolant reservoir or the radiator or even the hoses go bad, but in this situation it's actually the coolant pipe sitting under the intake manifold. So let's get this car up in the air and see how bad this leak is. So I'm seeing here that there's quite a bit of coolant leaking from the back side of the engine, right by that structural plate. Now if this was a problem with the actual radiator or the reservoir, we'd be seeing a lot more coolant up front here, or up top. Now this car has only been in the garage for a couple minutes. I'm already seeing a pretty big puddle. We better get started right away. We're going to start with taking the air box out, and then I can actually show you what I'm dealing with and where that leak's coming from. So it is a little difficult to see. Right there in center screen is a pool of blue coolant, right there. What's happening is that it's dripping from the top where the pipes go into the cylinder head all the way down past the oil pan and then underneath the car. So what that means for us today is we're going to have to take the entire cowl off, including the strut bar. I'll have to take this firewall section here off so we can get access to the intake. Then we'll take the entire intake off so we have access to those two pipes running down there. We'll replace those pipes, throw it back together, and then take it for a test drive to confirm that everything's okay. There's 4 fasteners underneath the air filter. You'll need to get these out before you can pull the tray. The vacuum booster line actually goes over this cover and connects to the vacuum booster. You'll need to disconnect this before you can take the panel out. Taking apart that false firewall reveals a lot more room to get this intake off. Let's get that intake boot off, the DISA valve, and then the rest of the accessories for the intake. So in order to get this boot off, I have to reach in there and undo the clamp that connects it to the throttle body. Now you have to do the top one there, and then hope the previous mechanic left you some room. I'm going to have to remove this check valve here in order to get this out of the way to loosen that clamp. Now it's difficult to see down here, but right below the idle air control valve and the boot that connects to it is the secondary worm clamp that connects the boot to the throttle body. You'll need to remove that clamp first in order to get the boot off. It comes off like that. I'm now going to take the oxygen sensors off the top. That'll give us access to the fuel injector plugs. So I want to note, in order to get this off, there's these little metal clips. You have to push them out of the way to disconnect off of the injector. So in this case, this is off. They normally sit like this, and you have to push them like that. It's not always a very easy thing to do. That nut right there holds the rest of this harness on. I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to bend the dipstick tube out of the way just a little bit. Need some extra room. I also like taking the power steering reservoir and moving it. There's two 13s over here. Just gets it out of the way and you can get in here a little bit easier. Now you can still see a little bit more what's going on with the emission stuff. Got some more connectors. We can see our leak a lot better now. Got some fresh coolant right there, and that's dripping from above. Now there are a couple things that disconnect now for the CCV system. This breather tube needs to come off. Be very careful with these. A lot of times they're very brittle. And then dead center screen, there's a tube right here. This connects the CCV system down to the dipstick tube where it can bring the oil back down to the sump. This is also going to need to be disconnected. Now the fuel line also sits down here. On most Beamers, the quick disconnect is right around here. If you reach back here, the top of the disconnect is going to be underneath the intake. It's difficult to get to say the least. But once it comes off, it looks like this. It's going to be similar to a GM style where you have to push this forward, pull this back so it unclips, and then you can pull it off of the fuel rail. So at this point this job gets really hard to illustrate on camera. We got a couple things that we can't see because they're hidden under the intake. First and foremost, there's an actual bolt that mounts the bottom of this to the block. That's generally a 16 or a 17 millimeter and can be accessed with a long extension going this way down. Additionally, we have some knock sensors that sit below here. Those have two connectors. There's a coolant temp sensor that sits between 5 and 6 on the head right below the intake manifold. Then this power cable needs to be fed through the runners between 5 and 6. And then I believe there are a couple zip ties or attachments on the back side of the intake where the harness goes around. So bear with me here on these next couple steps because it's going to get a little hairy.
So in this shot, I have my 6-inch extension on that 16 millimeter bolt underneath the intake manifold.
We're now going to turn our attention to the intake manifold bolts on top. There's quite a few bolts lying on the bottom there. And they're all going to be 11 millimeters. As you can see, it's pretty loose now. This is the worst part of the job. Alright, we have a much cleaner view on what's going on underneath this intake manifold. You can now see the stud that the bracket bolts onto, as well as the nut, the 16 millimeter that threads onto here. We have our knock sensor connector. These are normally zip tied, so it looks like someone's already been under here. And then when we have our lead from our starter,
And in this shot, we can actually see our two coolant pipes. This bottom one here routes coolant back up front from the thermostat housing, and then this top one here follows the cylinder head all the way back to the HVAC system, where it clips into a rubber hose right there that goes to the heater core. Now if we look over to the left side of the block, we can see that there's coolant that's been dripping from right up here where the coolant pipes connect to the cylinder head as well as the block. There's actually a really big puddle of blue coolant right down there, so this thing's been leaking for a while.
so behind this Vanos line, oil line, is going to be the nut that we need to disconnect for the top here. The second one is going to be sitting back here. First we need to disconnect the heater hose right here. Oh boy. Yep. And there you have it. Looks like those O-rings got really hard. The pipe itself isn't too bad. Normally you'll see that this starts to color brown, almost turns into wet cardboard. Now the second pipe feeds down here back to the radiator with that connection right there. Oh. Wow, this one is brittle and broke off. So the bottom side of this one looks fine, but the top has been cracked. Looks like that seal started bulging as well. We'll have to clean these holes before we continue. I'm gonna snake the new one back through. I'll take the top hose in now. There we go.
Before we slap the intake manifold back on, I do want to point out the coolant temp sensor that sits between 5 and 6. The pigtail for this is going to be sitting on the wire loom for the injectors, and it's going to clip underneath from the back side. Another thing to point out is this bracket that sits underneath the intake manifold. That's what we had difficulty reaching with that 16mm nut. So I used the long extension with my socket and reached underneath the throttle body in order to make that happen. On the side is the nipple for the actual fuel rail. That's where you're going to connect your actual fuel hose. And then there's also the little clips here that secure that fuel hose to the intake manifold.
So it'll be a little tight to get these intake bolts on. So I'm actually using my little claw tool with a magnet, and I'm holding it like that as I thread it on the top down there. Alright, now we're going to put this back on. Remember, I'm going to do the throttle body first, and then get this clamp onto the idle air control valve.
After bleeding the system off camera and taking the car for a test drive, the car is running great and not leaking any coolant. That's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoy BMW videos like this, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. You guys take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.